On a rainy October night in 1964, just hours before he was scheduled to testify before a grand jury, one of the most powerful men in America vanished into thin air. He wasn't a politician or a movie star, but his influence touched every corner of the New York docks, the gambling dens of Montreal, and the boardrooms of the five families. His name was Joseph Bonanno, but to the world of shadows, he was simply Joe Bananas. For 19 months, the FBI searched for a body or a lead, while the underworld held its breath, wondering if the man who helped build the American Mafia had finally been silenced. But the truth of his disappearance and the secret world he navigated was far more complex than a simple hit. To understand Joe Bonanno, one must discard the Hollywood image of a street thug with a Tommy gun. Bonanno viewed himself as a traditionalist. He was part of a lineage that traced back to the rugged mountains of Sicily, where the Mafia functioned as a private government in the absence of a reliable state. When he arrived in New York, he didn't just see an opportunity for crime, he saw a vacuum of order. Bonanno's core identity was built on the concept of being a man of honor. In his world, this wasn't about being good by society's standards. It was about a rigid, unyielding loyalty to a secret society. He believed that the organization was a way of life, a social system designed to protect its members and provide services that the legal world couldn't. This philosophy is what made him different from his peers, like Al Capone or Lucky Luciano. While they were often flashy and reckless, Bonanno was a ghost, a strategist who preferred the quiet leverage of respect over the loud violence of the streets. The most informative aspect of Bonanno's legacy isn't the crimes he committed, but the structure he helped create. Before the 1930s, the Italian underworld was a chaotic mess of warring factions. Bonanno was a key architect of the Commission, a sort of board of directors for organized crime. The idea was revolutionary. Instead of killing each other over territory, the five families of New York and other major families across the country would sit at a table and vote on disputes. Bonanno, who became a boss at the incredibly young age of 26, was the youngest founding member. He brought a sense of old-world diplomacy to this modern corporate structure. Under his guidance, the Mafia moved away from the Mustache Pete era of erratic violence and into a period of unprecedented stability and profit. He didn't just run a gang, he helped manage a shadow economy that rivaled major corporations. The most gripping chapter of Bonanno's life began on Park Avenue. Two gunmen allegedly forced him into a car, and he vanished. At the time, the media assumed he was dead, the victim of a power struggle known as the Banana War. However, when he resurfaced nearly 2 years later, he claimed he had been kidnapped by his own cousins. Whether it was a staged disappearance to avoid the grand jury or a genuine abduction, the event highlighted the deep fractures within the Mafia. Bonanno was a man of the old guard, and the younger generation was growing restless under his rigid Sicilian-style rule. His insistence on traditional values and his refusal to involve his family in the narcotics trade, a claim he made throughout his life, though debated by historians, created a rift. This disappearance remains one of the greatest mysteries in criminal history. It wasn't just a man going missing, it was the beginning of the end for the old-school, honorable image the Mafia tried to project. One cannot talk about Bonanno without discussing how he operated his family. Unlike other bosses who relied purely on fear, Bonanno operated like a feudal lord. He ensured that the families of his soldiers were taken care of. He invested in legitimate businesses, laundries, funeral homes, and real estate to create a front of respectability that was often indistinguishable from the real thing. His influence extended beyond New York. He had deep interests in Arizona and even attempted to expand the organization's reach into Canada and Haiti. To Bonanno, the world was a map of influence, and he was the cartographer. He spent his days in quiet meetings, often in social clubs, where not a single word about crime was ever spoken aloud. They spoke in metaphors and codes, a linguistic dance that kept the FBI frustrated for decades. Perhaps the most shocking move of Joe Bonanno's life happened long after his active years in the streets. In 1983, he did the unthinkable. He wrote an autobiography titled A Man of Honor. For a man who lived by the code of omertà, the vow of silence, this was a seismic betrayal in the eyes of his peers. While Bonanno didn't rat in the traditional sense, he didn't name names for a plea deal, he did something arguably worse for the organization. He admitted that the commission existed. He detailed the philosophy, the structure, and the history of the mafia. Ironically, this book became a roadmap for federal prosecutors. Rudy Giuliani, then a U.S. attorney, famously used the details in Bonanno's book to help build the Mafia Commission trial, which eventually put the bosses of the other families behind bars. Bonanno's desire to frame his life as a noble journey of a Sicilian traditionalist actually provided the legal ammunition to dismantle the very structure he had spent his youth building. While his contemporaries died in hails of bullets or spent their final years in maximum security prisons, Joe Bonanno lived to the age of 97. He spent his final decades in a modest home in Tucson, Arizona, surrounded by his family. He was a man who outlived his era, outlived his enemies, and even outlived the relevance of the old world mafia. He remained an enigma until the very end. To the government, he was a criminal mastermind who paved the way for decades of corruption. To himself, he was a misunderstood statesman of a forgotten culture. He lived his life as a series of strategic moves on a chessboard that most people didn't even know existed. His story is a chilling reminder that the most dangerous men aren't always the ones holding the guns. They're the ones who write the rules that others die following.